Last week, WWE announced that WrestleMania will be held in Saudi Arabia in 2027. The 43rd edition of WWE's biggest premium live event of the year will take place in Saudi Arabia, and there has been much talk about that, including huge amounts of negative reaction to it, including lots of people criticizing them for various different reasons, which we're going to get into in this video, and also lots of speculation about what WWE might do, but also what their competitors might do. So we're going to try and break it all down and go through everything over the course of this video, starting with why WWE did this. Now, I know it's obvious, but I thought it would be a really good place to start because it's very important to make clear WWE are doing this for one reason and one reason only, and that is the money. So the reports that have come out on this subject is that Saudi Arabia are paying WWE $100 million to go to Saudi Arabia for WrestleMania. Now, let's not forget, Saudi Arabia has already been a massively profitable relationship for WWE for quite a long time now. I mean, since 2014, in fact, WWE have been holding events in Saudi Arabia. The relationship was built really with Saudi Arabia paying WWE to put on these events, large sums of money, and then WWE would go across and do them. And of course, they started out with just house shows, but gradually that has escalated as WWE and Saudi Arabia have seen the success of the events. They've seen the gradual, erosion of any opposition to those events take place. And over time, WWE have become bolder and bolder in terms of what they're willing to give Saudi Arabia. And really, it shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody that WWE went ahead and decided that WrestleMania was going to be hosted there, because this has been coming. Obviously, the Royal Rumble next year is going to be taking place in Saudi Arabia. Now, you'd argue that the Rumble, with the possible exception of SummerSlam, is the second biggest event after WrestleMania, and that is going to Saudi Arabia. So it feels like this was only a matter of time. This was coming, but to put into perspective that $100 million. So the SmackDown television deal is $280 million per year, or works out to about $280 million per year, that the USA Network pay WWE for 52 shows, some of which are 3 hours. I mean, they've been running 3 hours for the first 6 months of this year, so that's 3-hour shows, but 2-hour shows, television shows, big productions, 52 of them, $280 million. Now, per show, that works out to roughly $5 million per show. And for effectively what will be 3 or 4 shows for the WWE WrestleMania weekend in Saudi Arabia, they're getting $100 million. So around $25 million, possibly more if you consider that actually that $100 million is to bring WrestleMania to Saudi Arabia. Now, I don't know how the financials then work after that. I assume WWE also make money from ticket sales. They'll certainly make money from merchandise whilst they're over there. So that will all be included. Plus, of course, WrestleMania itself was one of the big reasons why ESPN were eager to shell out the money to WWE in their latest deal for all the WWE PLEs. When that happened just recently, one of the main reasons ESPN were willing to give them so much money was for WrestleMania, because of the eyes that it attracts. So they're making money indirectly from WrestleMania. Now, of course, that's money they would have made anyway, but the point is that the WWE are going to be making that indirectly on top of the $100 million, plus all the ticket sales, plus the merch sales that they'll get in Saudi Arabia. It's a huge money-making, money-spinning thing. And I would be surprised if there are many Western countries or cities in Western countries that were willing to pay anywhere near $100 million to bring WrestleMania to their cities, because that is public money that would be spent, and therefore you'd need a lot of political will to do so. So the reports were that Las Vegas paid $5 million to host WrestleMania 41. $5 million as compared to $100 million kind of is a no-brainer in terms of why WWE went and did this. Now, obviously, there are a number of different reactions to that, mainly negative, and from what I can tell anyway, from 3 separate groups of people, or maybe people with 3 different reasons for disliking this. And it might be that, depending on who you are, you fall into more than one of these categories, but there are 3 categories of reasons why people do not like this. And the first one I'm going to deal with is the moral question, which is always the thing that comes up when we talk about Saudi Arabia and WrestleMania being in Saudi Arabia. I've long talked about the fact on the podcast and on other platforms that I would rather WWE didn't go to Saudi Arabia. I would like them not to have this working relationship in Saudi Arabia. For me, it comes down to basically, imagine if in the 80s there wasn't a boycott on South Africa during apartheid. I mean, we're talking about maybe not exactly the same thing, but we're talking about a similar ideal, which is basically that Saudi Arabia has an awful human rights record, continues to make illegal certain freedoms that should be basically a right, or at least in Western society we consider to be a right, and therefore by legitimizing Saudi Arabia and the government and the administration that run the country, ultimately WWE is helping to keep the status quo in place in an area of the world which is not ideal in terms of its treatment of its own people. So ultimately for me, I would like WWE not to go to Saudi Arabia. My question has been this week, is WrestleMania going there any worse than any other event? In terms of this from a moral perspective, now I know there have been some people who've kind of turned their nose up at this announcement, WrestleMania going to Saudi Arabia, just because of that moral question. But for me, that moral question is in place already. It doesn't get bigger or more of a problem because they're now taking WrestleMania there. I mean, you could argue that because WrestleMania is more mainstream, because it's the biggest event WWE have got, that by taking it to Saudi Arabia, they are going further in their legitimization of the nation. But in my view, they're already doing business. They're already willing to take their whole crew and put them over there and take major events over there. And ultimately, WWE fans are, if they want to continue to keep up with the stories and they want to enjoy the latest Royal Rumble, for example, in January, they're going to need to watch it, and it will be in Saudi Arabia anyway. So they're already kind of doing this. So for me, WrestleMania isn't really the problem. It doesn't make it any worse than the other events already going over there. I think ultimately the reason WWE have felt emboldened to do this now, regardless of the money involved, I think there was always a sense of, well, we don't want to push this too far because we don't know what the backlash will be. We don't know how severe that backlash will be, not only from the fans, but also from sponsors and from other corporate partners they've got. They've probably been kind of a little bit careful about this relationship over time because they don't know fully how that's going to reflect on them. I think what they've realized over time is they've kind of become more bolder, as I said at the start of the show, by first of all introducing specialist PLEs that were just for Saudi Arabia, like Crown Jewel, for example, and Super Showdown back in 2019. They've then escalated that to then put more established shows in Saudi Arabia, most recently, of course, Night of Champions, and then announced that the Royal Rumble was going to be in Saudi Arabia in 2026. And by doing this, they've gradually realized how far they can push it. They're like a toddler, basically, pushing their luck, seeing how far they can push the boundary of what people will accept. And they have decided or realized through the metrics, through the numbers still watching the events that come from Saudi Arabia, that it isn't actually affecting them in any way near the amount that it will, give them in terms of profit. So they're willing to go ahead and do this. There are some people out there I know that do not watch the WWE shows in Saudi Arabia as kind of a boycott of those events. But my point has always been, like, if you're going to boycott those events, WWE wouldn't care. WWE won't care if nobody from anywhere outside of Saudi Arabia watch the shows that are from Saudi Arabia, because they're getting the money. So long as you continue to watch Raw, SmackDown, you buy Netflix and watch their shows on Netflix, you buy a subscription to Peacock previously, or you buy subscription now to ESPN, they don't care. As long as you're doing all those things, they'll continue to run those shows in Saudi Arabia. Like, nobody outside of Saudi Arabia could watch those shows and they'd still do it. So if you wanted to actually impact change on WWE from going to Saudi Arabia, you had to basically boycott the whole product and turn around and not give them any of your time, not give them any of your money, and not buy merchandise, not buy tickets, not buy pay-per-views, whatever else, whatever other revenue streams they've got. That was always going to be the case. And so now WWE have seen that not happen. They feel emboldened. Obviously, if people didn't watch WrestleMania because of Saudi Arabia and it was in enough numbers, it probably would impact them somewhat. For example, Netflix in international regions and ESPN in North America might be like, well, hang on, we bought this package, this PLE package from you for a reason, and one of those big reasons was the numbers we expected for WrestleMania, and this year they're not so great. So maybe that would be one way of preventing WWE doing this again, but I would be very surprised if enough people boycott in enough numbers for that to happen. And so I don't see this as something is going to change, unfortunately, and therefore really WrestleMania is kind of the last stepping stone WWE needed to take in order to be fully almost knowing that their fans were going to accept the future relationship with the country. Now, I do understand those people who sort of see this as a final kind of nail in the coffin for any hope that Saudi Arabia would no longer be a partner of WWE, or that they see this as kind of the last sacred thing that is now being given over to money and to greed, although I would suggest that was already the case given the sheer amount of advertisements and sponsorships that has become prevalent through WWE's programming in general. And so I think for me, this is morally no real different than anything we've seen previous, but perhaps it's more about the individual inconvenience and disappointment that has been the bigger problem. And this is where I'm coming to the next group of people, or next reason why I think there are problems that fans have got with this, and that is coming from an international fans perspective. So basically other areas of the world outside of North America that are not Saudi Arabia. And specifically I'm talking obviously from my perspective Britain, but I'm also talking about Germany and France and Spain and Italy, nations in Europe who have been long-time fans of WWE and would probably consider themselves loyal countries, if you like, to what WWE have offered up. Obviously, WWE has been broadcasting in some form on UK television since the late 1980s, so we're talking around 40 years of WWE supporting and being a part of the WWE universe. And also, of course, it was in 1992 when SummerSlam took place at Wembley Stadium and gave WWE its biggest, at that time, its biggest paid audience of all time, unless you consider the WrestleMania 3 attendance figure to be legitimate. So you're basically talking about a lot of different countries and the fans in those countries who feel like WWE taking WrestleMania to Saudi Arabia first before it takes it to anywhere else in the world is a kind of slap in the face, that those fans are being taken for granted. And especially when you consider a few years ago at Money in the Bank, John Cena cut that promo in London suggesting that WWE was looking very heavily at taking WrestleMania to the UK. It just feels like we're getting a raw deal. Now, I think that this section of people are naive to think WWE care about their loyalty or the things that they've spent in the past. I think that WWE feel really quite secure that those areas of the world are going to continue to watch WWE and are going to continue to support WWE and are going to continue to snap up tickets at a huge rate as they have done over the last few years. WWE obviously have run live events, major live events, PLEs in the UK, in France, in Germany, and attracted huge crowds, record-breaking takings for a show in those areas. And I don't think that's going to change, and I don't think WWE think that's going to change as a result of them holding WrestleMania in Saudi Arabia. No, I get that feeling, I understand that feeling. I am obviously from Britain myself, but I think it is naive to think that WWE have any interest in caring about that stuff, and maybe even that they will think to themselves, look, now those other countries, have hope that we will bring WrestleMania to them because we've not kept WrestleMania just to North America. And secondly, that now those countries, those cities in those countries, know the cost of bringing WrestleMania to their cities. Now, I'm not saying that London or Paris or Berlin or anyone will spend $100 million on it, but they're likely to hit closer to Las Vegas and maybe beyond Las Vegas amounts to bring this show to them. One positive, I guess, though, for some of those regions, especially, for example, myself in Britain, is that this will mean WrestleMania is aired at a much more sociable time for me. It's likely that even I was thinking about the time difference, and I believe the time difference between Saudi Arabia and New York, for example, is 7 hours. And so as a consequence of that, I was thinking, even if they ran the show at 10 o'clock at night, they started the show at 10 o'clock at night and ran till 2 o'clock local time, that would still be 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 o'clock in New York time, and for the UK it would be, almost dead on where you'd want it to be, like in the evening effectively. So there are some positives if you want to see it, but ultimately I think those are less of a concern for the people that are annoyed for this reason. The third group of fans, or reason people might be annoyed, are for those fans in North America who have not been in a position before where WrestleMania has been outside of the continental North America. Like, it's either been in Canada or the US, more often than not obviously in the US, and for the first time ever the show is going somewhere very far away. Now, obviously, fans from Europe are used to this, having to travel across to the US to watch WrestleMania, taking long flights across to various locations within the US and getting a hotel, setting themselves up for a whole week, potentially in a foreign country to them, to watch WrestleMania. But US fans are not. And there may be a number of US fans who travel to every single WrestleMania who are now thinking about the idea of, in 2027, traveling to the Middle East to go and watch WrestleMania, which will be, first of all, a major kind of cultural shift from them having to actually travel somewhere overseas to get to WrestleMania. But also, you know, the Middle East itself is perhaps not a location that a lot of people necessarily will be attracted to go to. And I'm going to try and address this from a European's perspective, because I can imagine there'll be a lot of Europeans listening to this or watching this and thinking, well, I don't have a lot of sympathy for the American fans. They get WrestleMania every year. What's their problem? But I guess the way I tried to think about it was in the context of what's happened sometimes in football, or what's threatened to happen in football in the last few years. For example, a few years back when the Premier League was talking about having the 39th game, and that being a game that was outside of the UK for international fans to watch that would count towards the Premier League. Now, at that time, the fans of the Premier League clubs in this country were up in arms about that, because in their view, their clubs are part of their community, it's part of their kind of culture, it's their club, it's not Saudi Arabia's club or Japan's club or the US's club, it's their club. So there shouldn't be a 39th game. Not only that, but the idea was that it would undercut the entire idea of the competition, with everybody playing everybody else twice, once home and once away. Now, if you think about it in that context, obviously the WWE is an American company. It was, particularly in the early 80s and before that, it was a regional company based in the northeastern United States. So people from the New York area or Boston or places around there might feel a sense of ownership over what WWE is and where it kind of bases itself, and therefore going across to Saudi Arabia might feel like very much a step too far for those fans, because now it's just that little bit further away, and more WWE is being taken away by the world rather than just being an American-based company. And maybe they could live with that when it was Berlin or Paris or London for smaller shows, but when it's now Saudi Arabia for the biggest show that WWE holds each year, maybe that was just, a bridge too far for those fans. So I can kind of understand that too, although I think it's clear now that WWE truly are an international company. I've been saying this for a while. Their PLEs have ramped up in terms of going to other places. We've obviously seen the countries I've already mentioned, but in addition to that, we obviously had the big show in Puerto Rico a few years back. Australia got a major show. Don't be surprised if other locations across the world also get PLEs in the future, as WWE tries to truly make themselves an international company. They're very much taking the lead of the UFC, who are obviously, of course, part of the same company now, who a number of years ago started to expand outwards and internationally and hold major shows in pretty much all major countries across the world. And I wouldn't be surprised if WWE follows suits and does something very, very similar to that in the future. And WrestleMania being in an international location, regardless of that international location, is just the next phase of that taking place. If there's any kind of consolation for that group of fans, I think that for the time being, this will be a one-off international WrestleMania. I think for at least the 5 years after this point, WrestleMania will stay in North America after this point. But I do think that there's a time in the future where I could definitely see them alternating between being in the United States and then in an international location of some kind. And that would just follow the gradual progression that WWE is making to being a truly international company more than ever before. And it's not just the PLEs, it's also the talent on the roster. It's a much less Americanized roster than ever has been. There are wrestlers from all over the world on their roster and in prominent positions. So it really does feel like WWE are making that gradual transition, and they've been making it over a number of years. But this move to take WrestleMania internationally, wherever that was going to be, was always kind of feeling like the next major step in that process. So before I go into what WWE might do at WrestleMania 43 when they go to Saudi Arabia, I want to just ask the question of whether there are any positives to this happening, because I did see one article, I'm not going to name the publication, that kind of talked about how it was a major positive in loads of different ways. Most of them were about actually the growth of WWE and the growth of Saudi Arabia, neither of which I'm particularly excited about. So I wanted to talk about whether there were, for me, any positives. And I will kind of talk about these positives in the context of Saudi Arabia being a place that we would like to change, not necessarily that these are positives on the whole. So for example, certainly since WWE first started going to Saudi Arabia, and since the first PLE took place in Saudi Arabia, I believe in 2018, the women on the WWE roster have seen a much bigger role played in that show. You'll remember that when WWE first started going there, the women couldn't even compete. They weren't allowed to compete. That has now changed. WWE has been able to make it, or with the agreement of Saudi Arabia, that women can now wrestle on the shows that are in Saudi Arabia. Now, to conform with Saudi Arabia's rules around women, those women still have to wrestle fully covered from kind of toes up to the neck. So it's not like they're able to represent themselves or present themselves in the way they would to a US or UK or Canadian or Mexican audience. They still have to conform with certain standards that are being put on women in Saudi Arabia. And this is kind of a reminder in some ways of what women have to deal with in Saudi Arabia. But ultimately, there has been an argument, or there is an argument, I should say, that WWE going there and others going there, in fairness, to Saudi Arabia helped to liberalize the country. And I think this is the argument that's most being made when you see people like Cristiano Ronaldo and other major football stars going over to Saudi Arabia to play. We saw it with Jordan Henderson, for example. His argument was very much, well, me being there and me being able to talk about these things, that we should be trying to bring along to a more liberalized idea of what society should be. There is that argument. I don't personally buy it, and my concern is that by legitimizing Saudi Arabia in this way, there's kind of Saudi Arabia can make a few small concessions but not actually provide the true differences that this would make to the people of Saudi Arabia, who are the people who are ultimately impacted most by the control of the Saudi Arabian government and its administration. I will admit that I am reaching here. I don't think that these are major positives at all, and I don't even know if they are actually positives. I don't know if Saudi Arabian involvement in golf or in football or in wrestling has any chance of liberalizing Saudi Arabia, and I don't have any idea whether or not women being able to wrestle in Saudi Arabia is also going to make any difference. Ultimately, though, these are the cases that would be made by people who are pro WWE going to Saudi Arabia, and so I felt like it was right to represent those views as well. The only other positive I can even imagine is that this is a chance for some of the WWE superstars to live out some of their personal fantasies. So what are the chances, for example, of seeing CM Punk against Stone Cold Steve Austin in Saudi Arabia? That's something that Punk has wanted for a very long time. Maybe he will now have the chance to do so if Austin is able to be tempted to come out of retirement and work for huge amounts of money on this show. So that is a possible yet trivial reason why this might be a positive for some people, but as I say, it's a reasonably trivial reason to think that this is a good thing. I've got a couple more things to talk about. The first one is what might WWE do at WrestleMania 43. Now, obviously, I've already kind of mentioned Steve Austin, and I guess The Rock is on that list as well as people who might appear at the show. I mean, the money that's on offer is going to be eye-watering. We've seen Bill Goldberg return to WWE to work a Saudi Arabia show. We've seen Shawn Michaels come out of retirement for the one and only time ever to work a Saudi Arabia show, presumably because the money on offer was too much to reject. And I would imagine that WWE and Saudi Arabia are working together to come up with a pay package for somebody to work this show, if not more than one person to work this show. It would not shock me if both Austin and The Rock are tempted to take the money and go and work this show and work a match at this show, possibly even against one another. What would be stopping that from happening other than Austin and The Rock saying this isn't going to work for us? But we might get, for example, Roman Reigns versus The Rock finally. We might get The Rock versus Cody Rhodes. We might get Austin versus Punk. We might get Austin against somebody else. We don't know. The point is that presumably there's going to be a lot of work behind the scenes to get one or both of those men to work this show. To be honest, my mind was casting around for other people that might come out of retirement for such an event. I guess you could argue that The Undertaker might do so. I'd be surprised if Shawn Michaels did, and I don't think Triple H is physically capable of doing so. But certainly, you'd imagine there are going to be some legacy talents out there that will be tempted to come out of retirement for this one time to take the big payday. So I would imagine that WrestleMania 43 will involve some of those people, and they will be making a heck of a lot of money. In terms of what else WWE might do at WrestleMania, that weekend in general, I mean, you'd imagine that that week's SmackDown and the Raw after WrestleMania will also be in Saudi Arabia. You would imagine that, as has become custom for the way WWE do things, that the Hall of Fame ceremony will take place that weekend, and an NXT show, possibly involving AAA and or TNA as well. All of that might be involved just to make this a kind of bit more familiar to WWE fans who might be interested in traveling. One of the comments that I've heard come from people I've spoken to is that it won't feel like a WrestleMania weekend because you won't have all the independent promotions descending on this city, this one city where WrestleMania is hosted, and all of the wrestling community coming together for a weekend. WWE might try and make a weekend out of it by maybe promoting an NXT show, a AAA show, and a TNA show all separately, as if like there's still a feast of wrestling, even if all of those different outfits are associated with or owned ultimately by WWE. So I could see certainly a number of different events they'll be putting on in different locations in Saudi Arabia during that weekend. And I think that will be all part of WWE trying to make it as normal for international viewers or everybody else outside of Saudi Arabia as possible, whilst obviously acknowledging that this isn't quite the same as what WrestleMania normally would be. And that brings me, I guess, to what the rest of the wrestling world would do, because ultimately in 2027, there's arguably the case that the wrestling fan base, the traveling wrestling fan base who make a pilgrimage to WrestleMania every single year, will not be able to do that in 2027 because it will be in Saudi Arabia. You won't get independent promotions from Britain, from America, from Canada, from other places promoting shows in Saudi Arabia that weekend, or it seems unlikely that they will be because of the cost it would take them to make that journey and set their show up. Whether or not AEW will run a show in the same weekend. So there's been lots of talk about this, people talking about whether AEW should run a show on the same night or one of the nights in a stadium, a major AEW show that weekend to take advantage of WrestleMania not being there. Some people have talked about it in terms of sort of AEW being the savior of American wrestling, like them creating this big show, putting it on in front of a stadium crowd would be like a replacement for WrestleMania in America, and maybe then the whole of the wrestling world could just ignore that WrestleMania is taking place. I do think that's a little bit fantastical, to be honest, a little bit romantic, like looking through this in sort of a lens that is not really very realistic. That's not to say that AEW shouldn't do it for business purposes. The chance to sort of fill a gap for large amounts of people who want that major stadium show in America might actually be quite a good idea. Not only could they run a big stadium in America, they could whip up potentially a lot of support for what they're doing from people who would regularly go to WrestleMania. Hell, even if it was lots of WWE fans trying to send a message to WWE by saying, I'm going to an AEW show, if you're going to put WrestleMania in a different country or in Saudi Arabia or whatever, then that might be another way in which you can attract fans to your product. Them putting on one of the big major dream matches they've got within that company could still be a feature. They've got a lot of legacy people that WWE fans would obviously recognize. They might also try and encourage the rest of the independent wrestling scene, New Japan, even CMML potentially, to run shows on the same weekend to kind of make this much more the festival of wrestling that WrestleMania has regularly become over the years, and make it feel like you're having a WrestleMania weekend without WrestleMania being part of it. I could definitely see that being the case, and for me, for optimal kind of impact, I guess, on WWE, you could even run it like immediately after night one of WrestleMania. If you ran your stadium show like a half an hour or an hour after that, you'd allow everyone to watch WrestleMania, then come to your show and potentially be too burned out by night two of WrestleMania to even bother with it. Who knows? But I think that could be quite a good idea. As I said before, like even if you were starting WrestleMania at 10 o'clock local time, that would still be somewhere in the region of 3 o'clock in America. And if the show lasted for 4 hours, it'd be 7 o'clock by the time it finished. So AEW would have no problem running a show from, say, 8 till midnight or 8 till 11, or even immediately after WrestleMania at 7 o'clock till 11 o'clock, and run a 4-hour show or a 3-hour show or whatever they want in their own stadium show in America. I think it could work really well. I'm sort of basically hijacking WrestleMania weekend whilst WWE is away elsewhere. And look, part of this will be that WWE will probably have thought of this. You would expect that if they've got any sense, they will have thought about what are the negative consequences of going to Saudi Arabia, and one of them is this gap that will be plugged potentially by AEW, who might have a chance to just sweep in there and go, okay, well, we'll have WrestleMania weekend here in America, you can go do your thing in Saudi Arabia, make loads of money, fine, but we will kind of get all the fans to our shows and potentially get a lot more people invested in our product than perhaps we would have done in the past. The question for me about this is, would AEW be setting themselves up as the good guys of professional wrestling? Because I think that's the idea behind it. Or instead, if it went wrong, would they be setting themselves up as failures? Now, they've obviously, AEW have managed to fill a stadium a couple of occasions in London, and they did the show in Texas as well, which is a big crowd too. Would they be able to do it again in 2027? Obviously, that comes down to a whole raft of factors, including the position of AEW at that time. So it's not without its risks. I wouldn't say that they can just do this and it will be perfect, it'll be massive, but there's a chance it would be. And maybe this is the hope that wrestling fans are going to cling to, is that AEW, even if you're a WWE fan, you might cling on to this hope. As I said, there's a possibility that you could send a message to WWE that says that if you're going to take this show to Saudi Arabia, I'm going to go to AEW, where they're going to run the same thing effectively, just not called WrestleMania. So that is everything I wanted to talk about in regards to the announcement that WWE is taking WrestleMania to Saudi Arabia in 2027. If you've liked this video, please think about giving it a like, and also subscribe, as I'm hoping to make more of these style videos in the future. And yeah, thank you for watching if you've got all this way, and let me know in the comments below what you think about what's happening at WrestleMania 43, whether or not you're going to watch it, whether or not you object to it, what you think WWE might do at the show, whether there are any positives that I haven't thought about. Let me know all of that good stuff down below in the comments, and until next time, thank you for watching.